Hi, welcome to Susan Stanley's Stitch in Time. I'm so pleased you're here with me today. I hope you're stitching something fun. And thank you for those of you who continue to come back. And welcome to my new subscribers and those of you who are joining me for the first time. As you know, if you've been here before on this channel, I like to talk about cross stitch, quilting, textiles, and sewing notions from the past. And I also like to share with you the projects that I've been working on. Today's episode is going to be full of lots of color and eye candy. I hope you'll enjoy it. I will be sharing with you my whips and where I've progressed in the last 2 weeks. I have a new start I'm considering thanks to all of your input. I have an 1840s fabric parade, or actually I should say color parade. I have a new book that I'd like to share with you. I have a couple of finishes, and I'd like to go over some of the lovely comments and questions that I received from you. Please keep those coming. My first whip is Mary Brutnell, and I am shooting for a finish on her. Here's the beautiful goblins that I've been stitching with. They're so pretty. This is really, other than the Simple Harmonies box, this is the first time I've stitched with goblins. It's fun. It's a new experience. I'm enjoying it. They're a little bit thicker, but oh, you know, there's something about a rainbow palette like that. So pretty. Okay, so this is the chart I've shown you many times. Hedgerow stitching. I'm going to put a picture in right here of where I was last time. And here is where I am today. And of course, the more color I get in this, the more fun it is. I don't typically enjoy a ton of letters and numbers, so marking samplers, you know, sometimes they're, I don't know, they seem to go slower for me for some reason. But I'm going to try to finish this by next floss tube, and I think I have an idea for a really different finish. So stay tuned. Mary Brutnell will be done, and then I can indulge myself in something else. All right, next whip is Hannah Lancaster, and sorry for all this quiet space here. Oh man, I just had, yeah, once I found my happy spot with her, I couldn't stop. So, and here's the chart again. Of course, oof, there's a little dude right outside that house too. Trying to get up, so, all right, here's the threads. And I am trying to get up around with the border so I can use that as guide points. So far I've counted, recounted, counted, recounted. So far I think it's accurate. So it's always nerve-wracking until you get around to that final stitch. But oh, these colors are not typically golds and greens, and not typically what I, you know, gravitate to, but I am just loving this stitch. I am stitching it on Fuller's Teasel 38 count with a Veriswa, my own conversion, and it's been a happy combination for me, and I just can't put it down. I have a ton of fill-in here. You can see with the dress and the grass, and then I want to get these branches done. And this really is like a 3-section sampler. It's, oh, pardon me for the bump here. There's this bottom, the middle, and the top. And so I was hoping that I could do like 3 months on each section, because, you know, I have all these other things I do. I'm not especially super fast as a stitcher, but we'll see if I stick with it. So I think this is going to be my focus piece for the rest of the year until I get it done, and then I will slip other things in. But oh, I'm just loving it. I love that anyway. All right, so those are my whips, and then I am allowing myself to gather materials for a new start, and so many of you were so gracious to give me your input, and I decided on Sarah Wilson. I looked at all the charts. I love them all that I showed last time, the 1840s chart parade, and I love them all. I mean, there's not one of them I would be unhappy stitching, but the one that I thought I really want this on my wall. It does something for me. So I picked this one. Now, because it's 1840, 1837, around that time period, I am starting to notice a lot of similarities in colors. And I don't know if these designers charted from the back. I don't know, on Hannah Lancaster and Sarah Wilson, but I'm thinking perhaps they did, because the colors are very similar. So I pulled the DMC just to get kind of a feel, because I'm trying to audition some linens. This is Irish Coffee, 38 count. I don't know if I'm going to use it. It might be too dark, but just a few of these greens get lost on it. I think I'll go lighter. But anyway, that's going to be fun. I'm not going to allow myself to start until I finish Mary Brutnell. Oh, just love that in this blue. This is a little more tealy. This is, in fabric, this blue is an earlier blue, but, things don't stop at a certain time point. They glide into the next time period. So, so pretty. So that's what I decided. Thank you so much, everyone, for your input and your suggestions and all your kind comments. And maybe next time I'll have my linen picked and possibly the Avera Soie. I think I'm gonna go. It's charted for Avera Soie or DMC, so I think I'm gonna go with the Avera Soie. All right. So I'd like to share with you what I'm calling an 1840s fabric parade. And actually it's not complete in the sense of fabric. It really is just going to be focusing, I'm just going to give you an overview of some of the colors and dyes that were available in 1840. I had been thinking about this idea, and then I had a conversation with Penny Tucker, as many of you will know, on Instagram, who is just, she's an avid quilter and student of textiles as well. And so we have some great discussions. She now is a prolific cross-stitcher, and you can find her on Instagram. And I'm sure you all know her because she's the one leading. She's led Laura's birthday sal and Brenda's birthday sal. But I will link her below in case you haven't checked out her work. Anyway, so thank you, Penny, for kind of pushing me in this direction. You didn't know you were doing that, but you did. This is going to be a very brief overview because each color could be spoken about for hours. As you know, I make it really clear, I am not an historian. I am not a professional student. I am a lifetime learner, and I've been studying these things for most of the days that I've been quilting and stitching, which is 40 plus years. So I'm sharing with you what I know up until this point and what I have found interesting, and I hope you find it interesting too. I know there's no way to be exhaustive in this, so I'm just giving you a taste. You know, nothing that we do is in a vacuum. Our cross-stitching, our quilting, our knitting, it all ties together. And when you are interested in things of the past and historical things, you know that you're going to be looking at what was done back in that time. And it just sucks you into the life of people and how things were discovered and the production and the availability of products. Another aspect of things not being in a vacuum is that you can have a quilt with fabrics from that were just available in 1840, but also the fabrics that were available in all the years prior, because scraps were saved, fabric was precious. So the fabrics you see were not just in this time capsule 1840. They were from times before. Just like when I make a quilt on a smaller scale, I use the fabrics that I purchased 40 years ago. Yes, I still have fabrics that I purchased 40 years ago, and brand new fabrics that I've purchased in the last month, because I have always bought fabrics that were interpreted or reproduced from antique fabrics, and so they all work together. I hope that explains a little bit. So textile production in cotton had been happening in India about 1,000 years before it came to Europe and America. And in Europe and America, cotton fabric started to be produced in around 1700. Prior to that, it was silk, linen, and wool. And so, of course, if you're stitching a sampler from those earlier times, you have to really think, would cotton have been available? It's a good question. So European imports started to arrive on the eastern port cities in America in 1840. They were hustling and bustling all over the eastern end of the country. And American mills were just beginning. We hadn't hit the Industrial Revolution yet, so there really wasn't full-on production, but it was being dabbled in. Most fabrics were dyed at home at that point, and people think that the fabrics were, there was production going on, and people were professionally producing fabrics. We just didn't have the large factories yet, from what I understand. People think that fabrics in that time period were all brown. Oh no, they weren't. Actually, there was a huge vibrancy of color. Now, the reason you may think, well, I've seen these things and they're really drab and brown, that's because the fabrics were all done with natural dyes, things found in nature. There were no synthetic dyes yet, and there was still no real solid practice with mordants for all the colors, and that is what would affix the color onto the fabric, or the silk, or the wool, or the linen. And natural things, animal fibers absorb dye differently than plant fibers, so it's all part of the equation. And early fabrics were typically block printed with a resist dye, and so Catherine, Adrian, and I did a video together, gosh, I think almost 2 years ago, called Getting Chintzy. It's on my FlossTube channel if you want to go back and watch it. It was in the early days, and we discussed some of these early fabrics. So if you find this interesting, you might want to pop over there as well. So let me now insert for you my discussion of some of the colors of the 1840s and some of the dyes that were used. So as I said a minute ago, we will just be looking at the colors and the natural plants and things found in the natural world that were used for dyes. And one of my new favorite books that I've shown you before is this book, Wearable Prints, 1760 to 1860. It's probably one of the most exhaustive, detailed research books by Susan Greene on fabric, dye, and the process of printing. Now today I'm just talking about color and dye because, you know, each color, each dye could be spoken about for hours. And then the printing process is a whole nother layer, and the design elements and all that. But today, just color. And so I'm going to refer a little bit to this book just because, you know, it's new and it's exciting, and I won't overdo this for you. I just want to give you a taste of colors that were available in 1840, just so when you're stitching your sampler or working on a quilt, you can just have that in the back of your mind and just kind of relish some of that information. So one of the dyes that was probably one of the earliest dyes is the color indigo, and it's from the indigo plant. And I just have, you know, some swatches from my collection of indigo, ranging from this really inky blue, which you can see that this is a coverlet design printed on fabric, to this lighter blue, and that just was a matter of how many times the fabric was dipped, had the intensity of the color. But this color is really available in 1840. And in my trusty little book right here, you can see some clothing, and they really, I mean, these colors have really lasted. Indigo was a really staple dye, so it was used a lot. All right, another color that just happens to be one of my all-time favorites, I mean, I just can't get enough of it, is a color called Prussian blue, or Lafayette blue. It originated in Europe and then came to America. A lot of times it's an ombre, and this kind of shows you where it's darker and then it gets lighter, darker. That was really in fabric, not so much in threads, but you know, now we have threads that kind of have that mottled look too. So this is definitely a color that carried over from earlier times. And then another color I want to talk about is, of course, red. And I talked about red quite a bit in one of my earlier floss tubes. It's kind of funny to look back on those because it's been quite a learning curve. But floss tube number 4, I talked a lot about the process of red and dye and turkey red and why it's called that and whatnot. But it's dependable and it was common. And the natural sources for the color came from madder, a plant, logwood, and cochineal, which was a bug. But, you know, the Mary Brutnell I showed you has this red. How many of us just love red samplers, right? Red was just a hot ticket item throughout the century. But another dye that has been around, you know, way before 1840 was this plant, madder. And here are some of the colors that it was responsible for. It was even, so it went into a lot of the browns, deeper chocolatey browns, and you know, these were all naturally dyed. They were not synthetic. The mordants, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, weren't always stable, and so the colors didn't last. But madder was hugely important, and actually it was also the foundation of the turkey red that I just showed you. So madder was responsible, like I just said, for brown, but it also affected pinks. And the early pinks were corally, which I'm going to show you here. Should have shown you that first. Like in this little dress, more of a peachy pink. And then in the 1840s, we were starting to get these double pinks where there was a little bit of a red and a pink, a red base with a pink print, or maybe a little white dot. You can see that here as well. So dyeing just kept changing and changing, and it affected fabrics, of course, but it also affected the threads. Another really interesting color, I think, and shows up a lot in the samplers I'm stitching right now, is yellow. And Sarah Wilson and Hannah Lancaster have this mustardy yellow, and mustard, in fact, was one of the items used to dye this color. Onion skins, nutshells, bark, fustic, and weld. And weld was also a dye stuff, or an item that was used to dye quite a bit. Now this chromy yellow was just coming in I'll talk more about that at some point, but you don't see that as much, and we probably wouldn't gravitate to this in our samplers, but it was definitely a hot item in fabric. So there's yellow, and then purple. The biggest trend in purple in the 1840s was this double purple, where it was kind of a double violet, where it kind of had some shades within the fabric itself, and little specks of white. Let's look in the book here and see. This is a really good example here in the book. I'll just hold that up. Actually, you know what? I'm going to scroll down because this book is fabulous. It has the most incredible detailed pictures of in every topic. Fabric, printing, dye. So you can see. And so these have been reproduced fairly accurately, I would say. I think pretty good. So like I said, none of these were dyed with synthetics. They were all with natural items. Browns were, I'll just show you this. Oh my goodness. So many shades of brown, and it was probably one of the most dependable colors during that time. And someone wrote, a gentleman in the textile industry at that time wrote, there's a variety of shades of chocolate that were obtained with the madder dye alone. So you can see, you know, there's just all sorts of shades of brown. And I don't really think samplers have as much brown as the quilts from that time. I could be wrong. I'm just making a generalization. I really don't know. If you've observed anything about that, I'd love to hear from you. Here's some of the other samples in the book too. So I just love, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I love it. And then another color, of course, I've talked about it a little bit, was green. And this poisony green was super popular during that time, actually growing in popularity. But some of the earlier greens were bluer. This is a really yellowy green. And my sampler charts are charted for the more bluey green and kind of olivey green. I don't know if that was the original thread color or not. I'm going with what was charted, but. And then of course then there's black. And as I've talked to you before, so green was actually yellow and blue over dyed to obtain. It was a two-step process, and it often faded to a tan. So, you know, I don't know what people do when they're charting an old sampler. If there's a tan, it could have been a green. And then black, which is one of the last colors I want to talk about. So I wanted to show you this page in the book because it really gives you an idea, and hopefully your screen is capturing the way this black, some of these blacks have faded to browns. The black was probably the most difficult dye at that time to keep stable. Black really came into its heyday later on in the century, more in the Victorian era, but black was dyed with sumac, birch, oak, and iron. And because the iron component, often if there was a design element with black, it would eat away the fabric. I think when you see antique samplers, there's always this issue with black not being stable and migrating into the linen. I talked about this a little bit on an earlier floss tube. It was floss tube 23, if you want to look back at that and learn more. But this black actually was dyed with logwood. This is also a logwood black, so it's kind of faded to gray. So, you know, I think it's challenging if you want to you know, reproduce something to know exactly what was the original color. And so definitely before 1875, you have to suspect that the dye, I mean, there were no synthetic dyes, and so they were coming into play in 1875. So before that, you'd have to suspect that the dye was natural and kind of do a little research back into what was the original color. But I just find it fun. So thank you for indulging me in that in our 1840s color parade. And I really can't leave the topic of dyes without talking about what affected the dye's stability, and that is the mordant. Now that's the same concept today. If a dye is going to stay stable, a mordant needs to be applied to the fiber. So what is a mordant? A mordant is used in dyeing to bond the fibers to the dye. So whatever the mordant is, and I'll give you a few ideas of what was used prior to synthetic mordants. The mordant was applied in a thick, goopy layer. It was then the fabric or fibers were either dipped or block printed. And they were set with the sun or a steam room. Okay, other mordants, so some mordants include buffalo milk fat, lead, mercury, chrome, cyanide, and arsenic. So you can see that dyeing and fibers and fabric in the early part of the century was so toxic and so dangerous. And, you know, I find it amazing that these samplers and these textiles have survived, considering they probably contain a ton of these toxic chemicals. So I just want, you know, I would love to hear from you. Like if you're stitching something and you say, oh, I just made a connection that this is a, you know, 1840 and there's that blue, that Prussian Lafayette blue you were talking about in my chart. I would love to hear from you. I love to know what connections you're making. Of course, we can all make the connection to the red, right? Because I think many of us love stitching in red and stitching red samplers. So please let me know if there's a connection that you have made. I'd love to hear from you. So as always, I have a book to share with you, and this book, I just can't tell you how much I love this book. And I would encourage you, whether you're a cross-stitcher, a quilter, somebody who's just into knitting, or just, you know, doesn't want to do deep dives, just wants some general information, but something of interest, I would really encourage you to get this book. It is Quilts in a Material World, Selections from the Winterthur Collection. It's by Linda Eaton. And this book is just an incredible look at material culture. Linda looks at the historical and cultural world that existed during the making of the quilts and the bed linens of a woman named Mary Remington from 1815. Each chapter is centered around her letters that she wrote and her stitched works. And the book paints a picture of the world and life and politics and everything that was going on, international trade, you know, just the scope of 1815. And it's just fascinating. I'll just show you a couple pictures. Well, this is something I'm actually going to talk about a little bit more, but that's the label on her quilt. Can you see that? Yep, it was cross-stitched. Anyway, this woman, Mary's work was incredible. It's all stuffed and quilted trapunto. And it really gives you a glimpse into what life was like in 1815, the fabrics that were available again. It does talk about samplers, because samplers and quilts, they were not in a vacuum. They were all part of the world that was going on at that time. Some of the early chintz that was available. It's just a really beautiful book, but also super interesting and informative. Here's those hexagons that are so common from that earlier time period as well. So anyway, it's just a glimpse at early America in 1815 and the life of a woman who was a prolific needlewoman, because she had to be. And also I think she probably enjoyed it because her work is so beautiful. So that is a book I highly recommend. And I got mine used. Now this little quilt that I'm going to show you is a doll quilt, but I I didn't just finish it. I just wanted to pull it out to show you. It's something I finished a while ago. There were a couple things I wanted to pull out to mention. This is Betsy's thimble. It is the paper pieces or the stamp are available through a shop called Thimbles Quilt Shop. It's an online shop, and I will link it below if you are interested in making one of these yourself. It's a really cute little chubby thimble shape. But a couple of things I wanted to point out. This doll quilt does not have a binding. It's a knife edge finish, which is basically like a pillowcase finish. And because it's a doll quilt, I didn't quilt it. This was an antique that Betsy owned, the original, and so I tried to reproduce mine as close to her original as I could, pulling fabrics that were a lot like the original fabrics. It was also not quilted. It was finished with the knife edge. What I love about this little quilt, and what I loved about the original, of course, I kind of love the soft palette. I love the soft browns and the pinks, and then these pops of blue, and there's some of that Lafayette blue that we were talking about, and some indigos. So this has fabrics from early periods, but this definitely goes more into the last quarter of the century, like 1870 and beyond. It's got the matters, it's got the pinks, it's got stripes. Some of the stripes are very carefully cut, just like in the original. Some are cut on the diagonal, as you see here, this kind of wild stripe. There's serpentines, there's plaids. It's really a mix. There's shirtings, clothing, things that were used for shirts. It's really just a jumble of scraps, but I just love it, and I wanted to share it with you because it kind of ties into what I was talking a little bit about with fabric earlier, and the availability and the shades that were available, and the variety. And then the back I just did, it's not pressed. Next time I think I will show you what I do with all these doll quilts, because you're probably wondering, Susan, what in the world do you do with all these little things all over your house? So I'll show you what I do with doll quilts, a couple ideas that I have for displaying them. And then another finish that I had was the pincushion for my Tess box. I know everyone is just having so much fun decorating their little travel kit, and so I'm named for Tess, although the real Tess in the book would not have had clothing like that. But anyway, so I did a mini hexie pincushion, and I used red and blue, and that's going to kind of be my theme. And each month, or every few weeks, I'm going to add an item to my little travel kit. But so these are 1/4-inch hexagons. They are stitched like the larger hexagons. You just can't use glue. They're too tiny, you will shred the fabric. So at some point I'll talk a little more about how I finished it. I gave it some weight so that it wouldn't fly around in my little travel box. I did a little herringbone stitch with some 103. I don't know if you can see that. Anyway, I'm super happy with that. So I'll build around this. I plan to do a scissor fob and a needle book, and it's not a huge case. I have a little salt cellar for my orts. I don't know if that's going to stay in there, but so that's another finish that I had. I'd like to look at some of your comments and questions, and one of the comments, well, several comments I received from you were other charts that you were recommending from 1840, and I am over the moon about all the options that are out there, and I will definitely be exploring some future purchases of charts. I'm not going to start them. I'm going to be good. I want to discipline myself to finish a few things before I dive into another big sampler. I like those big ones. I do. They're just so beautiful. So thank you for that. And I would love to hear more. I want to know what you've stitched and the progress you've made and what you found enjoyable and challenging from each of these samplers that we discussed. But I did have a question that I wanted to address, and it was linen dyed in earlier centuries? And you know, we're so passionate about overdyes and dyed products now. It's a good question. It's a valid thing to explore, and the answer is no. There is no evidence of dye of linen. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Linen is actually notoriously difficult to dye, from what I've read, and white has been the most desirable and kind of a sign of, like, if you were really somebody who was somebody, you would want the linen that had been bleached in the sun, that had been woven from the best flax. You would want the most pristine, shiny, pearly white linen. So, okay, you know, 300 years ago, things were different. The quality and the strain and the weather conditions of the flax also affected the color. So, and then of course the ability to ship it to the bleaching fields in the Netherlands and have it bleached out. So it's a huge process. So Holland and Belgium had those sunning fields, and the linen was sometimes dipped in buttermilk and then laid out to bleach. And I had a lovely viewer send me a photo. It's actually a painting of women in these sunning fields laying out the cloth. And so I'm going to insert that in here because I just think it's beautiful, and I think you'll enjoy seeing it. So why do we see so much variety in color today? Several things. Some of the samplers, you know, some of the marking samplers, I'm assuming, were on homespun linen that had never been sun bleached. It was probably linen that had been woven in the home from the flax in the family field. It was not the highest quality. It had a different color to it because of that. The linen that looks aged and brown is because it's been sitting on a board for 300 years or 200 years, and it's absorbed the wood, from what I understand. I know in my old samplers there is discoloration based on what was touching the wood or the frame and what was not. It discolored differently. So we see that when we go into an antique store, and we love the warmth of it, but we have to realize that it probably wasn't that shade originally. It's all an aesthetic, and it's all what you love to do. And so please just do what you love. I'm just giving you a little information. You know, environmental factors also affected the linen. I don't think framing was museum quality 200, 300 years ago. Smoke in the home, fires, pollution, all kinds of factors could have affected the quality, the color of the linen, and changed it over time. The linen that has survived, especially that 17th century, those 17th century pieces, that was the best quality linen. That was the most finely spun linen, and bleached in the sunning. You know, it was cared for beyond just the weaving of it. So I hope that answers your question. If you have any more questions, this is what I know up until this point. If I find out more information, or if somebody has more information they want to share, I can share with you. I'm happy to pass that on. So next time we will take a look at my whips. We'll see if I've had a new start. I might have another little item for my Kiwana, and my Mary Snow, I'm hoping, is back, so I can share that with you. back from the framer. I'll give you an idea of where I'm going with the next set of things, and I'll have some books to talk about as well. So until then, make time for stitching.